I'm about to put these saws through numerous tests to see the power and performance behind the batteries. Now this is Makita's 40 volt range and it's sold with one of its 4 amp batteries. The Dewalt is run on the 54 volt range and we do have the 6 amp battery that is sold with it. Now to clear something up, if you're watching this in the US, this 54 volt battery is the exact same as the 60 volt you have in the US. Australia has different laws on how they market and label batteries. So when this battery is fully charged and as soon as you take it off the charger, it actually holds 60 volts. But the second you put it in the saw and turn the saw on, it's going to jump down to 54 volts. And that's what's interesting about the 40 volt range, because legally Makita have to label this as a 36 volt battery. They got around this though by calling these batteries 40 volt max. Max meaning it has 40 volts when you just take it straight off the charger, but it is going to run the saw on 36 volt. Now a simple way of looking at these batteries is looking at volts for power and looking at amps for how long the battery lasts, how many cuts we can get. So the 6 amp Dewalt battery should get more cuts than Makita, but we are going to test this out. We are going to run both of these saws for the same test with a fully charged battery, seeing how many cuts they can do through a piece of 9045 pine. One problem that comes with this test right now is even though I'm letting the blade come to a stop and rest, the battery gets no rest. In a real world application, between every single cut, you're going to be moving your timber, loading your timber up, or even marking and measuring your timber. This sets the battery rest, which cools it down. Doing the test I'm doing today, the batteries are all going to heat up, become hotter than what they normally would be in application. So there's actually a chance they can do more cuts than what we work out today if there's a sufficient period of rest between every single cut. So that's exactly 150 cuts now. We can see that flashing light and that's letting us know the battery is on low power. I was not expecting that. So for the 6 amp battery, we had 158 cuts. I'm about to jump on and test the Makita. If you've seen, I've recently done a review on that saw and we've done this exact same challenge cutting some pine. That got 172 cuts. So it had 14 more cuts than the Dewalt, but we're gonna redo the test. And that is because this timber is aged. It's been outside for a while, it's treated pine, but it might be harder to cut through. And on top of that, this Dewalt is brand new, meaning we've got this brand new blade in there. For this test to be as accurate as possible, I'm gonna run to Bunnings and switch that blade over. Just before we jump in and test the Makita, I realised I've made a mistake. So we just tested the Dewalt saw with a 6 amp battery. I had a look online and this saw was actually sold with the 9 amp battery. So what I'm going to do is while we're testing the Makita, I'm going to get this one fully charged and then afterwards we're going to retest the Dewalt using the 9 amp. We've got no brake, the battery's died, it can't slow down the blade anymore. That was 196 cuts. So it was about, what was it last time? I think 176. That was 20 more cuts than when we tested it last time. This is a packaging from the blade and it does say there's 113% more cuts per charge. So that could be why we had those 20 more cuts. This is a blade the saw came with and this is a standard 305mm Makita blade. This is not compatible with the saw. It does not fit in there. The ring size in the middle is too small for it to work. And these are the only saw blades that work with that saw. I'm actually unsure if this blade is the exact same one as the blade we just put in, or if that one's at 13% better, which could be why we got the different number. Regardless of what that was, for a 4 amp battery to get 196 cuts, that is impressive. Now I'm really curious to see if the 9 amp battery can make the Dewalt get more cuts than the Makita. Since this is the second time I'm testing the saw, the blade has already done 158 cuts. In terms of this endurance test, I don't think it's going to make any difference. These blades are designed for thousands or even tens of thousands of cuts, and they should not become blunt for a long time, making this test as accurate as the first test I did with this new blade. That's 200 cuts so far. Lucky, I thought I had no more timber, but I found one more off cut laying around. Alright, so it's dead at 233 cuts. That's actually really interesting because when I did the same test on the other version of the battery powered Dewalt Mitre saw, the one that has 2 batteries, and from memory we had 234, 235, something very similar to what we just got then. So with that test done, obviously the Dewalt can get more cuts per charge with the battery that comes with the saw. So that's a 4 amp versus a 9 amp. So I'm really impressed by the Makita. But at the end of the day, you're buying the saw with the battery and the Dewalt is a better option for endurance. Now the next thing we're going to test is the second biggest problem you can find with battery tools, and that is their power. For this test, I've got a piece of 190 by 45 pine. and we're just going to try cut through it. And I'm going to be timing the saw to see how quick it can cut through this. I'm going to start counting it since I pull the trigger. So we're going to be timing how long it takes the blade to speed up, and then also how long it takes to cut through the piece of 190/45. Since we're here, we'll start with the Makita. I did 3 cuts trying to go as quick as I can, and we'll take the best time out of those 3. And you can see I do need to wait a second for that blade to speed up. I tried doing a cut going through straight away and it just jams the timber. That is the difference between a DC powered battery saw and an AC saw, is that initial blade startup time. Without even getting the timer out and seeing the difference, I can tell the Makita won that one by a mile. The Makita felt like a hot knife going through butter, while the Dewalt had a bit of drag and I actually had to push it. Every time I cut the Makita, I could honestly go as quick as I could move the saw. For the Dewalt, we had some resistance and it did struggle to get through that timber as quick. Now this is actually really interesting. I just had a look at some technical data, and the Makita's blade actually spins at 3,600 RPM and the Dewalt one spins at 3,800 RPM. So this blade actually spins quicker than the Makita, even though it was so much slower at cutting the timber. I believe most of that has to do with the blade that Makita manufactures. Has to be a lot better than the Dewalt's blade. I do know for the endurance test that this did cut about 200 more cuts than the Makita. I don't think that's going to influence the results. If it was, it'd be a very minute influence. Just having a look at these saws too, we can see the Makita sticks up higher, and this actually weighs 29 kilograms compared to Dewalt's 22. Setting up for this video, I really did notice that difference, and even just the way the Dewalt's built and this big handle here, it is so much easier to carry around, and that's a huge benefit when you're moving these big saws around. Even if we look down at the bases of the saw, that's where we really see the difference in the size. Makita is so much broader and it sticks out, which makes it even awkwarder to carry, where the Dewalt is a lot slimmer. Because of the different sizes in the build, I want to jump in and test the capabilities of these saws and test how thick and how wide they can cut. First, we're going to test the width, and for that, I've got a sheet of 20mm ply. We're going to sit that on the base of the saw, and I'm just going to pull the saw as far forward as I can and see the maximum width that it can cut. This is just a random board I found. It's at exactly 400mm. I could try not to break it. It's cut the entire way, but at the very end, it's just nicked the corner. It hasn't gone the whole way through. Now, if we have a look at the back to see where it's cut through the entire depth, it's cut through 385mm of this 20mm ply. So we flipped this over for the Dewalt's one. It wasn't quite as good. That's only cut through 317mm of this ply. So the Makita's better for the width, but personally, I can't think of a single time I have or ever will need to cut something wider than 317mm on a miter saw. I'd rather the skinnier, easier to carry Dewalt over the Makita that can cut that little bit further. The next test is we're going to test the depth. I'm going to use the same bit of 190. We're going to stand it up on edge and just plunge the saw down and see how far down it can cut. This is a more important test because I can see myself cutting stuff up to 190 thick this way on a miter saw. You can see that as well. We have about 5mm clearance from the bottom of the blade to the 190. So this is the largest possible bit of timber you can actually fit upright in your miter saw. Quite impressed by that. You can see the front, it's gone the whole way down. You can see the full depth at the back, it's cut through 173mm. One thing I did notice is when you drop the saw down, it's got this gap at the back of the blade, and that's where it can get the full depth, the full 173mm. I don't think you'll ever have this, but if you were cutting something wider than 45mm, it will hit the middle of the saw here, and you can see that's stopping right there, which is about only 110mm of depth. That wasn't quite as good. That's a cut with the Dewalt, that's the Makita. And if we have a look at the back, that's the Dewalt's 173mm, and the Makita only got 165mm. So the Dewalt can cut deeper than the Makita can cut wider. Now if we have a look at the range that these saws give us in terms of the miters and bevel cuts, both saws can cut up to 60 degrees on a miter. The Makita though can spin 60 degrees in either direction, whereas the Dewalt can only go 60 degrees this way, and if we spin it to the left, it maxes out at 50 degrees. In terms of a bevel cut, the Dewalt can access 45 degrees going both ways. And now that's the same with the Makita, but the Makita can actually push past that 45 degree and continue going all the way to 48 degrees on both sides. Now getting that 46 and 47 degree can be really handy when you're trying to do miter joins on a room that's out of square. One thing I do need to mention with the bevels is obviously when you're using the saw, they're both locked in place. To open the bevel up, you just loosen this dial here for the Makita, and then your saw moves and you can set the bevel. However, for the Dewalt, it's the same thing, it's locked in place. Instead of having a dial here to loosen it, you've actually got to reach over. At the back of the saw, there's a dial, and you've got to loosen it there to access the bevel. And while we're talking about the back of the Dewalt saw with this dial here, you'll also notice when we slide the saw, the rails come out from the back of the saw. So if I was working inside or up against the wall, I can't have my saw set up against it there. I need to make sure it's set off the wall from where the rails are going to be all the way back. You can see there, that comes from the back of the saw to the rail, 530mm. Compared to the Makita, where the rails are actually fixed in place, and it's the saw that moves back and forth on the fixed rail. From the back of the saw to our bench, we have 370mm. Now, another feature that both of these saws have, and I want to comment on it, is the shadow line. If you don't know what that is, both of these saws have a light. You can see when I press the trigger, a light automatically shines on the Dewalt. And for the Makita, if I press the button here, we've got the same light on the side. I don't know if it's just me, but I do notice a difference that the Dewalt is a lot brighter than the Makita. If we have a close-up look at them too, what the shadow line does is it actually casts a shadow of exactly where the blade is going to hit the wood. So you don't actually have to line your blade up and touch the wood to see where it's going to cut. You can use this shadow line for an accurate representation of where the blade's going to cut the timber. It's a great added feature, but the Dewalt does this so much better than the Makita. Doing all the tests that we did today, I did notice it was a lot clearer, a lot easier to see on the Dewalt, even when we're outside and the sun was hitting the timber. I'm going to jump off the specs and the performance of these tools a little bit, and I want to comment on something that especially the Makita does not do right, and that's going to do with the dust extraction. For most of these tests, I've really even had a bag on. I've kind of let the sawdust go everywhere. But normally when I'm working, especially inside, I like to set up a vacuum with the Bluetooth feature. Both of these saws do have the Bluetooth feature, which means every time you turn the saw on, the vacuum that's attached automatically turns on too. Now, I do have a Festool vac, and I've tried to connect it with the Makita, and it did not pair. I haven't actually tried it with the Dewalt. I don't know if it will work with the Dewalt, but I think it's safe to say that you kind of want the same brand vacuum to make sure it works with the miter saw. The thing I've realized though, even without the vacuum, if I put the dust collection bag on the Dewalt, it does take most of the dust. It collects it. Right now it's completely filled with dust. That's probably why in a lot of the shops dust has gone everywhere. The Makita though has two extraction ports. So you can see we have one on the back of the sliding saw here. And unlike the Dewalt, which has nothing here at the base, the Makita have another extraction port here, which does have a couple turns that all the sawdust needs to follow through to come out the other side. I do prefer Dewalt on this one. That has nothing at the bottom there. It may not suck up as much of the dust, but what I experience is just the sawdust getting clogged all the time in these ports. And as soon as the sawdust gets clogged, the new sawdust just hits out and it kind of explodes everywhere. Now there's a lot to look into if I was to suggest my favourite between these two saws. This Makita saw costs $1,900 with a combo that comes with a charger and two of these 4-amp 40-volt batteries. For $200 less, you can get this Dewalt saw, which comes with a charger, but it only comes with a singular 9-amp 54-volt battery. I believe one of these batteries by themselves is probably worth $200, maybe $300. So I'm going to say price-wise, they're pretty much on point. So if we're just going to talk about the sheer performance and sheer power of the saw, yes, the Dewalt lasts longer, but I do need to lean towards the Makita just from that power and that ease that you get cutting.